Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome to this lesson on stress and accents in Spanish words. Okay, with Spanish words, knowing which syllable to stress or when to use a written accent is easy if you remember two simple rules. Okay? The first rule is if a word ends in a vowel or the consonants N or S, the stress naturally falls on the next to the last syllable and no written accent is needed. Let me repeat the rule. If the word ends in a vowel or the consonants N and S, the stress naturally falls on the next to the last syllable. This encompasses 75% of the words in Spanish, it seems. Here are some examples, okay? Notice the stress on the second to last syllable. Casa, Chile, caballo, hablan, joven, ends in an N, moscas, ends in an S, martes, muchachos. So those were words that follow the first rule. They end in a vowel, N or S. The second to last syllable is stressed when you say the words properly, so there's no written accent. Rule number 2 has to do with words that end in other consonants other than N and S. In Spanish, the most common other consonants would be L, Z, D, and R. Here are some examples. The stress in these words, if they follow the rule, would naturally fall on the final syllable. So there wouldn't be a written accent if the stress falls on the final syllable, like in the following words. Papel, veloz, edad, calor. Hear the stress on the final syllable. Papel, veloz, edad, calor. So again, that rule is if a word ends in a consonant other than N or S, the stress naturally falls on the final syllable. No written accent is needed. Now, what happens? When do you need written accents? You need written accents when a word, breaks one of those previous two rules. When we have a rule-breaking word, right? For example, if we have a word that ends in a vowel, but we don't stress the second to last syllable, we have to put a written accent over the syllable we do stress. Look at this example. America. The word ends in a vowel, America. We don't stress the second to last syllable as the rule would require. We stress the third to last, so we have to indicate that with a written accent. Another one very similar that follows the same example for the same pattern for the same rule is the word Mexico. Mexico, again, a word that ends in a vowel, but we stress not the second to last syllable, but the third to last. Okay? Look at the next word. It also ends in a vowel. Ají. Ají. Okay, why do you think this word has a written accent over the final vowel E? It's because if a word ends in a vowel, as rule number 1 states, we should stress the second to last syllable. Here we're stressing the final syllable, so we indicate that with a written accent. A verb form like hablé. Hablé. Same problem here. The word, when it's pronounced correctly, I spoke, hablé, stresses the final syllable, although it ends in a vowel. So it violates rule number 1, has a written accent. Okay? Look at the next word and see if you can figure out why it has a written accent. Okay? The word is lápiz. Lápiz. Why would lápiz have a written accent? Okay? The clue is that it ends in a consonant other than N or S, has to do with rule number 2. And we're not stressing the final syllable. We're stressing the second to last syllable, which breaks rule number 2. Okay. Finally, we have the word, another example, difícil. Difícil. Okay. Again, it ends in a consonant other than N or S, ends in an L, and we don't stress the final syllable as the rule would call for. We're stressing the second to last syllable, difícil, so we use a written accent to indicate that the word breaks rule number 2. Okay? So, just to recap, before I recap, I wanted to send a shout out to my student number 1, James out there in Mrs. Earhart's 4th period class. Shout out to my homeboy James, an A student. Okay? Alright, just to review the rules. Rule number 1 said that if a word ends in a vowel or the consonants N or S, we would naturally stress the second to last syllable. Rule number 2 says if the word ends in another consonant, we would stress the final syllable. any words whose pronunciation stresses a syllable different than what the rule calls for would need a written accent.